for about 3 years, which it's weird to think it feels like a lot and not much at all. So I basically want to, given if you are familiar with the current state of games, wanted to sort of do a really positive talk about some issues with games for really positive purposes. But it's going to start out getting a little bit dark, but I'm going to take into Mortar and lead right back out to the Shire, so it's going to be okay. So I want to start this off by talking about preconceptions. Preconceptions of what a game is, of who plays games, of who makes games and why, on what people want in a game, and on the culture surrounding games. I'm going to use my own experience to sort of frame this, so bear with me here. So the game I'm most known for is Depression Quest, though I make exclusively weird games. I think, I'm trying to remember how many I've actually shipped, but I've made about 30. My first game was an attempt at making a playable webcomic. Didn't go so well because I had no idea what I was doing whatsoever. But it's making interesting, weird games and sort of pushing what games can do has always just been something interesting to me. I really like what the possibilities are. So I ended up making Depression Quest after all this, which is a game on sort of a non-traditional topic. You don't usually see games about depression. It sort of seems to kick back against a lot of popular notions. And this talk is trying to be geared for people who have no experience with games and people who make games, so I'm trying to make sure there's a little bit of something for everyone, so if I ever explain myself, I'm sorry. So Depression Quest is an interactive, I like to call semi-fiction, because it's based on a lot of real life scenarios that were sort of extrapolated to try and make certain points and sort of use the experience as a tool to make a point rather than just to convey the experience itself. So it's sort of a weird, offbeat little game, and yeah, so that's sort of challenging what a game is or can be. It was meant to reach outside of traditional gaming circles, specifically from day one. That's one of the reasons that I chose to design it in a format that was very low barrier to entry. It requires no experience with something like twin sticks, which can be very difficult for people who are older or do not have experience with games to get it the hang of. For example, if you ever hand like your mom or your dad a controller and give them an FPS, they do this. So I wanted to make sure that I wasn't accidentally setting a barrier up to people who might want to play the game just through making the controls require some knowledge of gaming. Because I think a lot of things that we don't realize or we don't think about enough is how so much of games today are designed with 20 years of vocabulary in mind. And to illustrate my point, this is the best argument I can make for it. What happens when you see water in a game for the first time? Could it kill you or is it fine? Why would you think it would kill you ever? That doesn't make any sense. We are mostly water. And then there's things like, I've seen somebody's grandparents try and play Mario and they see that first pit and they jump down it going, oh, what's down there? So I wanted to make sure, since like the whole point, the design ethos of Depression Quest was to try and reach as many people as possible, to try and push back against the stigma of depression, and to try and reach out to people who might need it. So putting up barriers to entry there didn't seem to make sense. It's also one of the reasons that it was disseminated on the web with no download required, so that anybody could go and play. It's actually really interesting to see how often people just don't want to download something, but it's a lot easier to just go, here is a link, you now have no excuse. So like it's sort of trying to reach a new audience in terms of people who play games, and we've largely been very successful at that. It's been adopted by a number of therapists and universities to try and help teach people what depression is like in ways that only a game can, where it asks you to sort of immerse yourself and interact with the system of depression instead of just reading about it. So this was all going great. However, I released it as sort of a very charged argument that was sort of circulating online about what a game is and what a game can and should be. Gone Home had just come out and been amazing. Stanley Parable, I think, had just come out too, so there's a lot of pushback against walking simulators, and the term not game was thrown around quite a lot, which makes no sense. So a lot of the arguments that got thrown around about it was, well, this isn't fun. It's like, it's called Depression Quest, you know. That's not, okay. Or, I can't win this, I don't get it. It's like, yeah, you kind of can't win at a mental illness, my bad. This isn't challenging, there's no challenge. It's like, that's not the point. It's sort of a simulation, it's expressing a system. You can do whatever the hell you like in it. Or another thing is like, there's sort of a stigma against things like interactive fiction, especially Twine games in particular. Like, oh, these aren't real games because it's just words and clicking. It's like, okay. Given that it's a game about mental illness, it sort of makes sense for it to be focusing purely on the mental internal processes. I don't think it would have been a stronger work if you had to press X to get exposition. So I mean, and that's again, calling on these 20 years of vocabulary of games that we have all seemingly decided on, and passed on and on like a system of broken telephone. And for the most part, these design conventions are useful. They're shorthand, they work pretty well. But if you're trying to do something different, people can get very fiercely protective of it. So the game initially came out during this not games argument, which seemed to be like highlighting this cultural divide between the question which I think is a faulty question in the first place. Are games art? Are they a product? What is a game? Okay, so full disclosure, my slides got eaten. So I used this really cool tool by Darius Kazemi, where you type in terms and it just pulls the first Google image search for that term and gives you slides. So I have no idea who this guy is or what happened there, but he looks very serious about it, so you know, whatever. So it's this notion of what is a game, are they products, what are they meant to do, and obviously I'm a little bit biased. I think they're art. I think it's pretty self-evident that they're art, and I don't think that the argument makes any sense because art can also be a product. There's many other mediums that do that we can actually learn a lot from. Talking to indie webcomics people, for example, is super important. We're practically the same people with the same problems. Indie musicians are also really useful, and being able to take similar tools like Bandcamp was huge for indie musicians. You just upload it, people can pay what they want, it's there, it's done. You don't have to worry about trying to find a publisher. It makes it very easy to centrally distribute your stuff, which is almost exactly what itch.io is. And if you don't know what itch.io is and you're looking to make and release games online, please go there. They take 0%. They have the best customer service I've ever seen. Like, I've had people go, hey, this your site doesn't do this one really specific thing. That would be cool. And he's just like, oh, it does it now on your page. That's done. So just gonna plug itch.io there. So I mean, there's so much to learn from other mediums that have similar problems, and I think that helps make the argument that that games are art and not just products, but we can use a lot of the same ways that art is sustainable and distributed to apply it to games as well. So this starts to segue into the problem with, well, what's a game? You know, which I personally define loosely as being some sort of interactive media with some kind of system somehow. And then it's like, oh, well, how do you define interaction? What counts as a system? Is walking up to a thing a system? And then basically we've gone into beating a dead horse on that, which is it's not fun. It's basically a rabbit hole. There's no winning that argument. There's very, very rarely anything but slap fights over that, and people get very angry about and defensive of these definitions. I know I do sometimes, and people say Depression Quest isn't a game, or Gone Home isn't a game. It kind of irks me. It's like, no, I put a system in there, that's the point. So, and I think that there's just inherently, when you're passionate about something, it's easy to get defensive of it. Though some people can take this a step further and attack works that they see as challenging their idea of what the medium is and should be leading to, which is sort of the current situation is that we kind of have a culture problem. And I don't know why it chose Flappy Bird for this, but, you know, whims of the internet. So a little bit of background of what's going on now, since during this our games art argument, this hey, should we be allowing this seemingly intruding game really sort of kicked into high gear when I put the game up on Steam Greenlight, Steam being the largest digital distribution platform for games ever. I think that Twine games belong on there. I very purposely thought that it belongs on there. I think all games are equally valuable, and considering that they sell accounting software too and movies, I didn't really think that this was more extreme than that. However, a lot of people disagreed. When Depression Quest initially came out, we had no problems getting through Reddit, we had no problems getting through YouTube comments, we had no problems getting through 4chan itself. everyone either was like, I don't get it, or, oh, okay, whatever, or, hey, this actually meant a lot to me. But as soon as it hit Steam Greenlight, then it was like I didn't stay in my comfortable weird spot of like, oh, this is online, whatever, you can download it if you want, I don't care, to, oh, this is like on Steam, that would give it legitimacy, that's not allowed, we can't do that. And that's when things got really nasty. In particular, it's just indicative of this, of another issue in games, because like, when it hit Steam Greenlight, this forum for depressed people, exclusively male, exclusively over 30, exclusively virgins, like, no, that's not like a dig, that's like literally what it is. Started talking about Depression Quest. Somebody sent me an email with a heads up that they were planning on, like, coming for me or whatever. And then I started getting creepy phone calls. I had gone to their website and seen the thread and just like, whoa, that is weird. A lot of it was like, this isn't a game, and women can't have depression because a man will solve all their problems for them, with no hints of irony or self-awareness. And that sort of larger misogynistic pushback to female creators sort of continued to spiral. We saw it, it's not just me, it's happened, like there's almost everyone I've talked to in games has experienced some form of it, and this has sort of recently culminated into the clusterfuck we call Gamergate. Gamergate started on August 16th. It started when an angry ex-boyfriend of mine posted about 9,000 words of just bile. And in this little nugget, which was like immediately on 4chan, everywhere else banned it because why wouldn't you? People had decided, though, even though the accusation wasn't made in the first place, even though there was no evidence for it, that they levied that familiar attack that's been thrown at every single successful female creator since the dawn of time, that clearly I must have banged somebody for Depression Quest to get anywhere, and that clearly, I was sleeping my way to some nebulous top of indie because apparently that's where games come from now, is if you make out just... But all of that aside, I'm not here to talk about the sexism in the industry. That's a whole other talk. But I think one of the reasons that this has exploded for the last 2 months of my life in such a specific way that is spread to almost to a T, only female creators and people who defend them. It's like the sense that they're interlopers, that we don't belong here. And Depression Quest, I think, was like, the fact that I created Depression Quest, I think, was just so easy to latch on to. Because, and say there's no way it got the acclaim it did based on merits or based on silly little details like the fact that we had over 1 million players before I submitted to Steam Greenlight. Clearly it was the boobs. And I think like that's more indicative of the point of this sort of pushback against weird things, this pushback against things that are not considered traditional games, because a lot of people who are outside our sphere, who haven't played games, only see Call of Duty and Mario, and like maybe Candy Crush. That's their idea of what games are and what games can be. But people inside games kind of like have this really, like there's another faction that is very traditionalist and angry about this, the kind of people who are like casuals and stuff like that, that sort of see anything that isn't that as a threat, as though we're trying to take them away. And I don't know why anybody would think Halo and Depression Quest are in competing markets, but regardless. It's been 2 months of hell. These people are incredibly defensive of it, to the extent that it's essentially ruined my life. I had a hard time actually finishing the notes for this talk last night, because an actual Nazi, like an honest-to-God swastika tattoo-having Nazi, was screaming at me. Men's rights activists were harassing me and writing, like trying to rewrite history and twisting facts about something I said on a blog when I was 17. Trying to paint me as some shadowy overlord. Some hateful guy I never met tried to dredge up like anything he could, and I actually got into an argument about if it's ethical to accept payments for your games and services on PayPal. Somehow that was a controversy, and that was yesterday. That was just yesterday. That was my day yesterday. But I'm telling you all this and telling you how kind of messed up things are and how disappointed I am in all this, to sort of partially tell you how I'm getting through it. And the way I'm getting through it is I'm playing a lot of threes, I'm playing a lot of Dynasty Warriors, I'm playing a lot of Phoenix Wright, and I'm playing a lot of Crypto the Necrodancer. So we have these huge issues, we have these huge problems, and I think, at least, again, leaving the culture issues aside, where it's very narrow, not just in terms of what games are made, but who's making them and if that's okay. Leaving that aside, I want to tackle the problem of what we can do as creators, of what this medium means to me and why it's important, and I think the answer is more games. I think and I mean, I'm still here through all this because I love games more than they hate me. So, and again, through this, no matter what, it's games are still the way I get through it, and it's not just playing games, but it's also making them. Working on a really stupid FMV game is really nice sometimes. So I want to go into, so this talk is basically going to be talking about healing games, games that express love and gentleness, both from examples of games that don't mean to do it, like that it's not their primary focus, games that do mean to do it, and how to make games that do that. So that's essentially, now that I've done my rambling background of why I think this is so important. So yeah, games can help heal you and connect you in ways that you really need, even if they weren't explicitly designed for that purpose. This is an incomplete way that conventional games can heal you. The most obvious one that we always hear of anytime we seemingly have to defend our medium and our hobby and our craft is that escapism is very important for people, and that's the easiest, obvious one. And through talking with people and how much games mean to them, I've noticed this weird thing among 20-somethings particularly. A lot of us escaped in Commander Keen when we were kids. I talked with this one guy who did a Let's Play of Depression Quest and talked about stuff, and we just had a back and forth, and he was saying how much games mean to him, and how basically Commander Keen was how he got through his parents' divorce as a kid. He would go into in the courthouse while they would be going off and having horrible, bitter slap fights about things. He would just go off into this small computer room that was on the side of it that had Commander Keen on it. So instead of having to be there and having to see that ugliness and be confronted with that, he was able to go be a kid in a helmet jumping on stuff and play the worst level design ever. And 2 weeks later, I was talking to somebody different, and they had almost the same exact story. Parents divorced, Commander Keen, it was how they got through things. I know when I was a kid, it was one of the first games that I fell in love with, and it let me be somewhere else other than a really crappy upstate New York rural town of 5 people and mostly cows. So even just simple games from your childhood, even as an adult when things are stressful, this escapism is a very valid, useful way of helping heal yourself. But it goes a lot deeper than that, I think. There's things like, as I mentioned, threes. Distraction can be super important, and I'm going to sort of talk about this from the point of view of somebody who has an anxiety disorder. So I mentioned it earlier in terms of being a coping mechanism for me in particular, because during the worst of this, when I couldn't sleep, when I would start panicking, I would just play threes for a while. It was you would have these negative feedback loops where you're freaking yourself out, you're hyping yourself out, you're getting too much anxiety, and go play a really freaking adorable game with very small, repetitive, kind of Zen-like qualities. And it's quick, it's easy, it requires very little investment, you jump in, you jump out, and I think there's something to this, especially for anxiety sufferers. I think games like Threes and Tetris can be very good for sort of breaking out of your own habit and having simple mechanics that are still very engrossing and still very good at pulling you away from whatever's happening inside your brain that's basically causing it to eat itself. Actually, I really want to write a thing about how Threes has helped get me through this. So outside of empowerment and distraction, we also, outside of escapism and distraction, we also have empowerment. When you're feeling powerless, when you're feeling like you can't do anything, sometimes being able to jump into a game and get really good at it can be really healing for you. To remind yourself that you can do something, that you can get good at something, that you have some agency. I think it's especially important and amazing for people living with disability who might not otherwise be able to, like, if they can't actually play a sport, they can still, like, sometimes still play Madden if their disability doesn't get in the way of that. You know, like, it's a lot easier for people who might not otherwise be able to go out and feel like they've got power to jump into a game, be really good at it, and have some feelings of self-worth generated as that. There's also catharsis. And this is going to be really stupid, so bear with me. So part of a fun side effect of Gamergate is now I'm probably going to have to continue to fight court battles for the next 3 years, at least, assuming that it doesn't go higher, and there's a good chance that I will end up in a Supreme Court fight. So that's fun. And this takes forever. If you've never, the legal system in the US, the way that it works, is everything is incredibly drawn out and dumb. There's a lot of going there, sitting there forever, waiting for stuff to happen, and then something happens and it's like, cool, now we have to have 5 more court dates to make sure that that first thing is okay. It usually takes, for a criminal trial, like about a year from when charges are actually issued, which is a whole process before that, to actually going to trial, and that's if you're lucky. So this is incredibly frustrating. This can feel like you're raw. It doesn't feel like you're doing anything. It feels like you're sort of trapped in this purgatory. However, having a stupid anime cartoon lawyer game, it sounds dumb, but it's nice. It's nice to be able to take a caricaturized version of a real-life struggle that I'm actually dealing with and have some sort of resolution and jump into a place that makes it safer and less serious, and you know, it takes way less time to finish a game than it does to fight court battles, except for Dwarf Fortress, probably. So just having that catharsis available to take a process that might otherwise take forever, feel horrible, be beating you over the head, and be able to basically, pardon my French, fuck off and go play a safer, fictionalized version that gives you some closure, where the good guys win, and where you're not powerless, is actually really kind of cool. So outside of catharsis, we also have de-stressing. I know Dynasty Warriors sucks, but I can't stop playing it. It's like the Taco Bell at video games. I want to play it at 3 in the morning. I know it's not going to be good, but I just want to freaking kill 1,000 little dudes. And so, using this to sort of make a larger point of, like, sometimes you really just need to blow steam off. You need to turn off your brain. You need to not have to think about stuff, and stuff that is even goofy and mindless, like Dynasty Warriors. Freaking anime Romance of the Third Kingdom Chinese history Dynasty Warriors can have this healing effect, because you get to just go into your zone, have mindless ridiculousness. In my case, go from having the mindless ridiculousness of hundreds of thousands of internet people sending me rape threats, and then fuck off to ancient China and kill hundreds of thousands of people. And it's very good for de-stressing, and just turning your brain off and relieving some of that pressure. And one of the most important ways I think that games can function as a healing force is with connecting with other people. Multiplayer games have been amazing for getting other people to connect. I know personally I had a period of time where I'd moved to a new country, I was dealing with really massive anxiety issues, and I was too afraid to basically go talk to anybody ever. And I would wake up and in the middle of the night and have panic attacks and just feel really alone. There was a moment where I realized that if I had died in my basement apartment, no one would notice I was gone for months. However, World of Warcraft, being able to sign on and just be with other people, instead of just laying in bed, staring at the wall, freaking myself out, it was infinitely helpful for my mental health. And like all the WoW addict stuff aside, and the fact that, you know, there's a bigger issue to be had about how these things can reinforce and end up being addictive, the social aspect of World of Warcraft was so important. Even if I was not talking to other people or around guildmates, just going and feeling like I was, just not alone, was huge. And it's one of the coolest things about MMOs, even if I don't think they're the best design games, they're still really cool. And again, this is another thing that's really important for people living with disability. Daniel Dwyer did this brilliant piece on GameSpot about called Depression in Games, and if you have time to look it up, please do. It's a brilliant piece of media. that talks to people who live with depression and how gaming has impacted their lives. There was one woman in particular that he spoke with that has, very severe medical issues that make it very difficult for her to leave the house. However, even just signing on to something like the home channel on PlayStation, where you can play the bowling games and stuff, was huge for her. She made it, and this is something that I don't know if it's just a generational thing, but we have this demarcation for some reason between internet friend and real life friends, which I think is rapidly becoming useless. I mean, again, this is gonna sound stupid, but I was the moderator of a Pokemon IRC room 8 years ago, and I'm still friends with almost all of those people. We would sign on, we would trade, we would play games, we became incredibly close, so much so that I actually ended up having one of them as a roommate, and we still keep in touch all the time. They're some of my oldest, dearest friends. A friend of mine, I don't remember the first MMO they were playing, but it's one of the ancient proto-WoW ones. He's been with the same group of friends that he met there for the last 10 years, and every year they fly to New York to see each other and be around each other and sort of have their yearly reunion. So there's no clear demarcation between internet friend and real friend at that point, and it's super important. And the connections that you make in multiplayer games are really powerful, and it gives you something to do together. It gives you something to bond over. It's like instant friendship. It also, I think, can help you be a better person, because there's plenty of people I met in games that I did not agree with, that we would butt heads constantly, that we came from different planets, but we had the same goals. We still wanted to play the game together, and we were both really good at it. So it was like it can help you respect completely different people and completely different points of view, which I think is really cool, because you're still united by this common cause of overcoming the challenges presented by the game. Another really important thing, I think, is and this is something that I think we're going to see more going forward, is games that can be a memorial to someone. There's this incredibly heartbreaking but beautiful comic that was made by somebody talking about their experiences with Animal Crossing and their disabled mother. Their mother bought them this copy of Animal Crossing and used to play with them every day. The kid was like meh about it and kind of, wandered off, but his mom got really, really into it, fully upgraded her house, did all this stuff, and then his mom ended up passing away. So he ended up going back in the game about a year afterwards, because he just had kind of forgotten about it and found it, and went to this little village, and all of the animals were asking what happened to her and where she was, which is kind of a gut punch. But he then went to his house in-game, and it was full of, his mailbox in there was full of presents that his mom had worked really hard to get him. So it's sort of still kind of having her around. And it's not just limited to games like this. So EVE Online is pretty much known as cutthroat libertarians in space. It is one of the most ruthless games out there. However, a member of one of the biggest guilds, Goonswarm, ended up dying, I think, last year. And all of these people that were part of this guild did all these huge memorial services. They basically set up this thing that looked like a bubble with a light in it, and everyone sort of put that out there to a candlelight vigil for this friend of theirs that they had played this game with and shared this game with. And I'm not sure entirely, but I know that they had a standing memorial up for a long time, which is really hard to do in EVE because everybody acts like an asshole. But it's kind of a beautiful sentiment and a beautiful way to remember somebody. There's also this great story about World of Warcraft again, where this young kid had a medical condition and through Make-A-Wish got to go to Blizzard and tour the facilities and design some things and design a quest, and he actually voiced the character, which was super alarming the first time you hear it, because there's just this little kid voice coming out of this big bowl asking can you help me find my dog? And he ended up passing away in 2008, so the makers of World of Warcraft actually named the Elder after him, and I believe the NPC is still in the game to this day. And as soon as he passed away, everybody from that side went to go do this little kid's NPC quest, and it's even when we lose people in the real world, it's kind of cool that we can have digital worlds where some part of them still remain, and I think that's super powerful and cool. So that's just none of these games are specifically designed necessarily to be something that focuses primarily on like loving or healing, or they're pretty standard games, you know. You fight monsters, you level up, or you like climb on stuff, etc. But they still can have these healing impacts on the way that it's like emergent healing, I guess. However, I feel like there's games specifically designed to have this effect, to have this gentle, loving, welcoming effect, and I want to talk a little bit about those too. I'm going to start out with Gone Home, which I'm going to spoil the living crap out of, so if you don't want that spoiled, I suggest you cover your ears. So Gone Home is probably the most loving game that I've ever experienced. It's a game that made me feel the most love, so much so that I huddled up in a blanket with a former bandmate while we were both having really bad anxiety and just sat down and played the entire game, and it was like having a warm blanket around you. And it did this in multiple ways, actually, which is why I'm leading with this example. The game mechanic itself is designed very lovingly. You're playing as this woman who's going home from a tour in Europe for backpacking, college stuff, and you arrive at your house and it's empty, and you're basically going through the things in this house to try and find out what happened to your family. But there's something that it does that a lot of games don't quite in the same way, with I think the same intent. When you pick up an item, your character looks at it, and then you are given a put back button. So instead of just being like, "Burp," like you normally do with games, you're like, "Oh, I remember this. This is a mixtape that my kid sister made," and you put it back. So it's like you're looking through your own house. You're not just like you would normally. Though someone did collect all of the items and just drop it in the living room, which was kind of awesome. Also, the way that the character that you're inhabiting for it interacts with her environment is very loving. It's very nostalgic. Like one of the first items you come across is this little duck with a wreath on it, and you're like, "What did we call this? Oh, right, Christmas duck." And like it changes while you're holding it. Like she's like thinking about it and remembering it fondly. Beyond that, there's a point at which you come across a sheet of paper, since a lot of what you're doing is finding your kid's sister's belongings and handwritings and stuff like that. And it's very clearly about her having sex. And it pops up for like 3 seconds, and then she's like, "No." And if you try and pick up the item again, she's like, the character's like, "I'm not doing that, you can't make me do that. That's rude. Nope." So even just the way that you interact with your environment comes from this place of being very gentle with it, very loving, and it's kind of nice. It also has this sort of subversive element to it that, again, spoiling the living crap out of it, it presents you with this big house that's empty. There's a thunderstorm, there's red splotches in the bathroom, and your family is missing. There's a cryptic note by your sister saying, you know, "Everything's all right, don't worry about it, you'll understand someday." All of the settings for a horror game, all of the settings for like a haunted house, and like there's all this like little hints at haunted houses and murderers throughout it. And there's this common thing in pop culture where when we have genre fiction that deals with queer kids, with gay and lesbian kids, especially teenagers, a lot of it is about suffering. A lot of it is about, just because of where we are in terms of progress, at least in the US right now, it's about how hard and messed up everything is, and it usually goes to tragedy, and it usually focuses on suffering. What Gone Home did is it set it up like it was about to do that, and I was like, "Nope, sorry, these two girls just get to be in love, go to hell." And it's like, oh my god! So instead of making it a story about suffering for being gay and how hard it is, they just let them be stupid teenagers and made it a coming of age story. And that is I think directly healing a genre convention is just and it sounds like such a small thing, but it's so important. Personally for me, another element that of healing that it sort of did for me is I have never seen myself reflected in a game so much. Down to when they had the red splotches in the bathtub, I didn't fall for it at all. I'm like, "Oh, that's from hair dye, I do that." When it was like meant to be set up to look like blood. It's like, "Nope, that's hair dye, I had something like that." Like, so much of it was, I've never seen queer teenage riot girls in a game before. So seeing yourself reflected when you're used to having to play as like some big burly dude with glasses and stubble and short hair and just very silent, and you don't expect yourself to be represented, and then you are, it's like, oh my god, my heart. So just like as a player, it meant a lot to me, and it really, I don't know, I was really touched by it, and it's like when you see yourself reflected, when you see stories about people like you, that it says somebody notices you exist. It says that they care about you, and that your experiences matter and are worth telling. And that's earth-shatteringly important in a way that I can't describe. And this sort of subversion of tropes and narratives that Gone Home does with like their two lesbian kids in love actually just get to be in love and don't die horribly, is like that sort of subversion of traditional tropes and narratives as a direct challenge to the negative things that a lot of media ends up creating, sort of ends up having this really cool healing effect. Another good example of this is a game called Kindness Coins, made by Arden Kehoe. It's basically riffing on Japanese dating simulator stereotypes of, you know, you put X amount of kindness into this girl and then she bangs you and that's it. And that ends up, like, that sort of oversimplification has really nasty meta-narrative implications. It's sort of like, oh, well then you're owed sex from women for like, you were nice to her, and we actually see that dialogue happen a lot outside of games and outside of culture, just with like person-to-person interaction. What Kindness Coins does is it sets that up to specifically subvert it, and to say, no, that's not okay, that's actually not how anything works, and nobody is owed anything in return for just basic kindness. And it does so in a way that treats the things that it critiques with gentleness and understanding too. Like there's a male character who gets really mad at her for, you know, he's like sort of the de facto protagonist of every dating simulator ever, and when she's not interested in him, he's like, what the hell, I was nice to you, and you led me on, and they actually have a really good discussion about why he feels that way, and, you know, acknowledging that that's like, that doesn't make him evil, that doesn't make people who feel like that evil. So it treats even the things that it's sort of subverting and calling out with the same kind of kindness and gentleness, and not making him a one-dimensional strawman, which I think is very important. Some games have this same sort of healing and loving effect by just making it so that the actual interactions themselves are only doing positive things. Hug punks is a great example. You literally just hug people. That is it. That is what you do. And it's short and it's just nice. It's a game where all you do is hug people. And I think it's important that games exist where the verbs that you use in terms of interactions, like what is actually going on, are different and weird like that. So Hug Punks is a good example of this. Some games ask the player to act as sort of the positive healing kind person effect. Like Luxurious Superbia is a good example of this. The point of the game is to make the game feel good. And you have to be gentle, and you can't just like do that on it. You have to like very specifically touch it and react to it, telling you what it wants. And it's just this really positive, sweet interaction it's purely just making a game feel good. And it's really embarrassing to play in public because of some of the noises it makes. So if you get that, maybe don't try it out in front of people because they might think you're a bit weird. There are games that give this gentleness and love to the player directly. Broken Folks is a short jam game by Ariel Grimes that just shows people dealing with harder, difficult circumstances, and at the end of it, explicitly tells the player that everybody's kind of broken, everybody has their shit, it's okay, we accept you and we love you. And that's a really powerful statement, and it's a short jam game, but it's still something that specifically calls out the fact that we're all kind of weird and messed up, and maybe that's okay, and that's a powerful statement. There are games that discuss specifically non-fictionalized real-world things, and either try to address them or try to get other people to understand, which for misunderstood things in society that have stigmas against them, like that's one of the reasons I made Depression Quest. Dysphoria is an amazing example of that, which deals with a trans woman's experience in transition. Another really good one is That Dragging Cancer, which will punch you in the heart really hard, which is about a father dealing with his son having really bad cancer. And Papa Yo is also a very good example of that, which takes it to sort of, it abstracts it a little to have more traditional game mechanics, but it's still very clearly dealing with things like living in an abusive household as a kid. And this can be difficult. Like, I still have not played Papo and Yo because I'm afraid of what it's going to do to my heart. But the fact is that these things exist, that we're talking about them, that we're destigmatizing them, we're, exploring them is, I think, really healing and really loving for the medium. Then there's just games that are just freaking lovely. Like, Tearaway is nothing but lovely. It gives you this bright-eyed, innocent, wonderful little version of the world to go mess around in, and the game loves you. You feel like the game loves you. It's adorable, it's soothing, it's sweet, and it's genuine and innocent in a way that I think is just beautiful. So then, like, part of the question is, how do we, I don't know what the hell that board game is. How and why do you make games for healing? Like games specifically for healing and for love and things like that. I think one of the most important reasons why you should do it, if you can, and then my notes are getting all wonky. It's super powerful in games particularly because of the nature of interaction between the designer and the player. Every game by default is an outstretched hand. There's no game without a player. It's a back and forth. You're basically writing letters in a bottle to somebody that you hope is on another ocean that you can't possibly predict, chucking him out to sea and hoping you get something back. So because of this very sort of intimate relationship between the player and the designer, and like how you're sort of just trying to communicate with somebody you've never met, I think it can be incredibly powerful for communicating loving, empathetic, powerful interactions between these mysterious third parties we call players. So why make a game like this and how? Whoa, it's missing some of my slides, whatever. Okay, so part of why you should consider doing it if you want to is your own healing process. I made Depression Quest because I had to. I absolutely had to. It was like my brain was eating itself alive and I needed to pull it out and put it somewhere else. I needed to externalize it instead of just self-destructing. I needed somebody anywhere to understand what was wrong with me. And it was a very difficult point in my life. If you've seen the Depression Quest trailer, it's 15 seconds of me laying in bed staring at the wall and it says Depression Quest coming up Valentine's Day. I lost my job that day. I made that video immediately after losing my job because I had gotten pneumonia and America is wonderful and wouldn't let me go to the hospital. And when I asked, they did not like that I wanted time off and were like, well, maybe we shouldn't pay you $8 an hour to serve coffee to people who treat you like shit. So I went home. I didn't know what I was going to do. I had the game partially finished. A lot of it was just me beating myself up in it. And I filmed the trailer partially to give myself a default due date to make sure that I was doing something instead of just stewing, to hold myself accountable and try and pull myself kicking and screaming through the hell that I kind of ended up in. So making that game was just, I had to do it. The actual act of making it was so crucial, even if I never shipped it. Just to get some of that out of my head, to partially release it and be able to even examine my own interactions and my own negative feedback loops. Another thing is just another thing to consider for making games for healing or something like that is to help people understand a particular thing, like the games I mentioned earlier, and games like mine. I really think games are a powerful tool for this empathetic reason, for asking somebody to directly assume a different identity and to walk a mile in their shoes. It's sort of like the equivalent of showing and not telling in a way that can be very powerful. And I think communicating things through systems, showing people, hey, I live by different rules because I have this thing I deal with. Instead, like considering social constructs, mental illness, what have you, breaking them down into systems when they are systemic, and then asking people to interact with them in a way that they might not otherwise, I think is a very powerful tool for getting for building understanding of how other people live and what they have to deal with in their lives. They can also, making games like that can also give people hope. When tackling difficult subjects and experiences, it can be easy just to focus on how bleak everything is. And that was something that I was very concerned about going forward with Depression Quest. That's one of the reasons why suicide is not an option in the game. And it's one of the reasons why there are things that can help make things better if you reach out to support networks, if you're able to try and drag yourself in to get help. And at the end of the game, like one of the endings is, that you're learning how to live with this. You're learning how to manage it. It doesn't feel like it's going to devour you whole anymore. I think Dysphoria has one of the best and most beautiful endings I've ever seen in the game. She talks about the struggle. She talks about how shit it is. And then she starts talking about how it's starting to get better and how things aren't perfect or where they need to be, but they're starting to get better. And it's just a slow pan of like a butterfly flying up. And it ends on the words, I think I'm onto something really beautiful or something like that. And it's that hope, conveying a crappy thing that people have to live with, and then saying, hey, it's not a death sentence. There is hope. I think is just such a phenomenally powerful statement, especially once you've gotten the player invested and they're in there, they're submerged, they're experiencing things, and then that can be really heavy and difficult, and then to show that there's hope at the end, especially if there's someone who lives with it already, I think is super powerful. You can also use games in quite a direct way to express love for someone else. There's a lot of people I know that have made games for one other person, and some of them are just absolutely beautiful. There's one I will never see that a friend made another friend for his birthday. It's the only game he's ever made, and it's just awesome. Another one I've seen is talking. It was a game made for this woman's lover, who's like offbeat and awesome. And there's one thing that really just hit me about like how she's talking about how if she outlives her someday, like scattering her ashes out of the plane, and just because of the kind of person she is, they would make like a dick in the sky. Which it's just such a beautiful, perfect thing, like because of how wonderfully weird and amazing this person is. It totally would. And I've made games for people before, even just like small game-like things, like I mess around with Arduinos and stuff a lot. And to try and awkwardly flirt at my boyfriend, I hooked it up so that if he kissed me on the cheek, a video of fireworks played behind me, which is really dumb. But I mean, like, using systems and software and stuff like that, you can make very direct expressions of love and affection. Also, games can making games can help you feel less powerless and frustrated, even when you're not being overt and direct about the subject matter that you're discussing. So I was doing a project for a while called Tidbytes, where I was making a new game every 2 weeks, and just putting it out there, trying to basically steal the webcomic format, because I'm super original. And I had half finished one game one of the weeks, but something had occurred in my life. I had found out, like a few months prior, that a childhood friend of mine had gotten murdered. No suspects, no witnesses, just they found her body beaten to death under a bridge. And that sucks a lot. And it was something that, when you know the person who did that to someone you love is going to get away with it, you have to go through a very difficult process of accepting that. Then, these incredibly opportunistic people, calling themselves ghost hunters, decided to interfere with the family and try and make a name for finding my friend's ghost. And it was all over the local news, and the family had gotten this sort of hope resurrected in a really kind of twisted way. They're like, oh, well, maybe. And it was heartbreaking and infuriating. I was enraged because, like, they are more into that sort of thing. I personally do not believe in ghosts, and I thought these people were just opportunistic vultures trying to prey on a young girl's murder. So I got pissed, and I didn't know what to do with that. So I made a game called Ghost Hunters Hunters, which is total shit. But, because I made it in like 2 hours and the art is just garbage. It's like totally garbage. But basically the premise of the game is you've thrown a sheet over your head and you're trying to find ghost hunters and scare them away so that they stop fucking with people's families. And you can't see too well though, so you have to go by bullshit meter. And the bullshit meter goes up the closer to bullshit that you get. It's a very angry game. And so like you go up and then you scare them and they're like, ah, and they run. But being able to do that, even though the game's totally crap, being able to channel these feelings of rage and powerlessness, because it's like there's nothing I could do. At best I could go, you can't tell somebody who's grieving for their daughter or their sister that their hope is false and that they should just move on, because that makes you a tremendous asshole. So instead of being that guy, I made that game, and it actually really helped me not just stew in rage and let it eat at me. So even if you don't release a game, just sometimes getting really pissed off and making a game is really cathartic. I made another game called, what was it? I forget exactly. It's something like Game Industry Credentials Measurement for Women. And it asks you to press your breast against the screen, and then judges by size what you're qualified for. Except it says it only tells you what you're underqualified for and what you're overqualified for. It's like, well, you're too big for Lara Croft circa 2014, but you're too small for Lara Croft circa 1993. Or you're too big for a programmer, but you're too little for the face of a studio booth babe. And I did this after getting a really nasty email from somebody that told me my tits were too big to possibly be a programmer. So I got pissed and I made a game about it. People kept calling me a fake nerd girl, so then I made Fake Nerd Girl Detector because I got pissed and I made a game about it. And it's really nice. It sort of takes the power away from a thing, because when it's just this, like, something you're just like, fuck about, and you don't feel like you can do anything, just fucking off and making a thing about it, especially like if it's a systemic thing, to communicate your frustrations to other people who probably have experienced it and agree, or just to get it out is really, it's really useful. So, concerns that you should have if you're designing a game about healing: constantly ask what your mechanics are saying, especially if you're dealing with a serious issue. It's very easy to say something fucked up on accident. Like, the way mechanically medication works in Depression Quest is it doesn't take, anytime your level would dip, it doesn't take it away entirely, it just takes the sting off of it a little. Because if we had made it so that, say, you get on meds and then everything's fine, our mechanics are inadvertently saying medication is the answer to depression, which was not a thing we wanted to say. Which is also why we had so many other alternative ways to try and, like, bring your mood up, like reaching out to friends and family, because if the only way to get better was medication, that's saying the same sort of the same sort of nasty thing inadvertently. So constantly ask what your mechanics are saying and if that's what you mean to say. Another thing is, ask yourself, do we have to lazily fall back on the established mechanics of jumping on shit and shooting and fighting for skill checks? Do we really have to keep doing that? I love video games, I love indies, but holy shit, how many more pixel art platformers do we need about feelings? No offense to people who make pixel art platformers, I like them, but do we really have to keep making them for things that it's not mechanically related to? Can we please challenge ourselves to come up with a better conflict and feedback loop? Do we really need to make games to only make games that are about, I don't know, maybe racism that is just a fucking shooter? Do we need to do that? Can't we just make a game about racism that actually examines it from a systemic point and doesn't require treating our players like idiots who need to shoot things to care? Can we please think of new systems that actually look at systemic issues that we're actually talking about and do that, instead of going, well, it's a game, so it should do X, Y, and Z? No, don't do that. Stop it. That got ranky. Also think about what feeling you want the player to be experiencing and design every single thing around that. Think, what do I want them to be feeling while playing this? How do I want this to feel? And then, since games are really cool because we have so many tools at our disposal, structure the mechanics around that, structure the level design around that, structure the audio and the visual, every single thing should feed back into that specific feeling that you're trying to evoke. And I think things like Gone Home do this very effectively. Everything feels, again, very welcoming, very loving, through mechanics, through mood, through level design, through the way that you interact with the world. The cohesive design is what makes for good games, I believe. Playtest constantly, obviously, to see if that's even coming across. Well, it's one of the nightmares of working on a comedy game, is that testers are useful to me exactly once. Because, and I've actually talked with horror game designers that have similar issues, because when your game runs on surprise, hey, guess what doesn't work so well? And once you read your own joke 500 fucking times, it doesn't sound so great anymore, so test constantly. Try not to be exploitative or evil. If you're making a game about a serious subject, do your fucking research. Do not proclaim to be an expert if you are not. Go talk to people who are. Even if you are an expert, go talk to other experts. Get 1,001 opinions, especially if you're making a game that concerns issues that you are not currently living with firsthand. I mean, Gone Home deals with 2 lesbians in love, and it was written by a dude. And he did all that, and it works perfectly. It's absolutely possible. Just do your homework. You don't have to show anybody ever what games, if you make a game that's very personal, and if you make a game specifically to get feelings out. Don't feel compelled to show anybody if that's not the point. If you make a game for a single person, don't feel compelled to post it anywhere. Games don't have to be anything. Everything is up to you, so don't feel pressured to go into these well-trotted notions of what things are and aren't. It's okay to be weird and vulnerable with your work. Please be weird and vulnerable with your work. If you're like, oh no, I don't know if anybody's going to play a game about, I don't know, depression, don't let that discourage you from doing it anyway. We need people that are pushing the boundaries. We need people that are not afraid to be weird. We need more things that are vulnerable instead of marketing the same exceptionalist, you are the hero, everything revolves around you, nobody else matters, just you. Don't be afraid to make the player feel weird. Don't be afraid to make the player uncomfortable. Please make the player uncomfortable. Make more things that evoke more feelings than, you're Billy Badass king of the fucking universe. We can do better than that. And don't, if you have an experience that you've lived through that you want to convey, I promise you someone else wants to play it. I thought with Depression Quest, 5 people would play it, 4 people would think I was nuts, 1 person would go, okay. I did not expect millions at this point. We're coming up on 2 million. I did not expect to get on Steam. It was just a sad little thing I needed to make so I didn't go crazy. So don't be afraid to be weird. Get weird. Please get weird. We need more weird. Make sure you're taking care of yourself too. Don't fall into this bullshit trap of the suffering artist. You can take care of yourself. It's okay. It's not somehow more legitimate if you make yourself suffer on purpose for your work. You can sleep, you can take breaks, you can eat. You can do that. I'm giving you permission if nothing else. Use it as an excuse. But don't become one of these people that brags about having not slept in a week and been working 60 hours and not seen your friends or bathed or slept or done anything for themselves. It can be incredibly tricky to be working on a game about feelings, and you're already you're dealing with so much when you go into making a game. It's hard. It's a process. It's draining. If you're adding on top of that all the emotional uncertainty about being weird or vulnerable or putting yourself out there, you have to doubly make sure you take care of yourself and you don't just fall into despair. You are more important than your work. Please don't die making games. So in summary, that was a really long slide of a really boring board game. That is a weird thing that pulled from Google Image Search. I didn't write that second time. All right. They know, they're on to me. Oh my God, is it? Oh God, is this Dariusception? Crap! Okay. Okay, so in summary, I think games are an incredibly powerful medium that can do more than just be seen by the rest of the world as sad, lonely gamers in their basement that treat people like shit. I think that we have a massive PR problem, and despite all the shit that I've seen in the last 2 months, despite all the shit I've seen gamers do over the entirety of my career, and as someone who grew up loving games, fuck you, this is ours. They can leave. They can get uncomfortable and leave. Games are powerful, games are important, games can do so much more, and should not be limited down to a single emotional experience of making you feel badass. Games can do so much. Games are have been one of the most loving, healing forces I've ever seen in my entire life. I don't think I've ever talked to somebody who cares about games that didn't have it do something for them emotionally, even if it was just having space to fuck off, even if it was just having somewhere else to be than in their current state. And as of this, I think it's very important that we talk about and that we focus on games that do more than that. That we can talk about the ways that games are positive, that we can talk about the people making them who care and are expressing these acts of love, that are expressing these acts of healing, that are trying to take care of and embrace and love their players. The truth is, games are great. They're full of possibility and hope, regardless of if you make them or play them, regardless of if they're meant to be something that heals you or if they're just there when you needed it. And they're only getting better. The democratization of game tools has lowered the barriers. Alternative methods of development and distribution are becoming more and more common, and this is a good thing. Games are for absolutely everybody, and the fact that it's becoming easier and easier for voices that have been otherwise not heard till now to be able to finally be heard and be making and be creating is vital to the growth of our medium, and it's important, and they deserve to be protected, and I refuse to let gamers and game designers be thought of as these manipulative shitheads that don't want things to change or get better. That got a little bit angry, I'm sorry.
No, thanks so much on behalf of the whole room. Thank you so much for coming here. Thank you so much for talking. It's been such a wonderful experience to share this time with you. We are so grateful. We're so grateful to you for speaking and speaking out and for speaking so entertainingly this morning as well. Have you got time to take a couple of questions?
For sure. Sorry I said so many cusses.
Would anyone like to ask... They were very amusing. Would anyone like to ask Zoe a question here this morning? Anyone? John. It's John Weinberg from the National Film and Television School.
Okay, I'd like to ask a question called Progression Crest, which means, first of all, what's next for you? And secondly, do you feel that some of your games are quite, most of your games, what I've seen, are quite punk, lo-fi, immediate, spontaneous. Do you feel there's a route forward, as there was to some of our more famous musicians in the 70s, who would move forward to collaborate and progress and even embrace production values which weren't necessarily immediately accessible? And we do this in the film industry, we do this in the music industry.
John? Were you a punk?
I was a new romantic. It's very embarrassing. I'm really sorry about that. So I mean, that's what because we would take a talent, a raw talent who's got a lot to say, and we'd want to see it kind of move outside of their immediate audience to a wider audience even, and that wider audience being, something that might be enabled by the collaboration with other people and the progression, and that's the sort of very inarticulate question. I'm sorry about that.
Are you asking me if I'm selling out? No, I'm working on a few things right now. One of them actually being hopefully higher production. We're going to have to kickstart it, but I'm working on an FMV game in the style of Night Trap because it's the indie rite of passage to make it the childhood games of your nostalgia, and the first console game I ever played was Night Trap. So I think that's one of the reasons I'm weird. I drunkenly tweeted at one of the stars of the movie The Room, which is one regarded as one of the worst movies ever, demanding he be in a game with me quite aggressively, and for some reason he agreed. I've also been talking with the female lead of Birdemic, which is also a really freaking bad movie. So I'm actually trying to take those higher production qualities. Well, I guess that's not. It's gonna look like it was on a VHS. But I mean, deliberately bad. And probably have to spend money to make it look shittier than it is. But yeah, trying to make it, it's my first time working with a bigger team, and that's quite weird. I don't like that. It's weird having to tell people what to do, so I just got a producer and I make him do it. So yeah, I'm working on that, but I'm still making really small, stupid games as well. I think that the production values and length of the game and team size should be entirely dependent on what the project needs, not necessarily what you want to happen. I think one of the worst things you can do as a designer is be like, this needs to be this way because I say so, rather than listening to your game and seeing what is right for it. So given that a lot of my work is stupid bullshit comedy games, it's very difficult to do long-form comedy in a systems-based medium because you have to constantly be subverting your systems. And one of the worst things you can do in comedy is overtell the joke. So I'm still probably going to make a bunch of really tiny bullshit idiot games. I mean, I made one last month called Waiting for Godot, the game that's a loading screen and nothing else. So I'm going to keep doing that until somebody probably stops me, because really I don't know why people let me do that. So I don't ever see myself having a studio, though. I don't want to. Just because I get really uncomfortable, again, being in charge of anything. I would rather be able to find more sustainable routes to continue making weird stuff, rather than assimilate into the very well-established channels of, I guess, indie success of getting everything on Steam, doing, doing PAX, doing E3, whatever. I don't care about that. I thought about it. I think I've been helping enough other projects. Like I've been doing narrative design on a game called Framed. Not my shit. It's a weird thing to accept, but I feel like my time and energy is best suited to trying to fight for more alternatives to making strange things sustainable, making room and space and survivability for shit that doesn't belong on Steam, to free up people to be weird and and to be able to make whatever they make without having to worry about marketing it to a very specific audience and finding those new audiences as well. I'm very into that. Like itch.io is super important. Oh God, what was the other system? Oh, Patreon, incredibly important. So I'm going to focus my energy there because I think it's better use.
Good, thank you. Another question, please, from anyone. We have here Christos.
Hey, recently on Twitter you were talking about using tech to build like bespoke Tamagotchis, essentially. And of course Tamagotchi very much centered around the idea of taking care of something over time and how that can almost be like having a real life pet. So I was kind of wondering how that ties into the whole games as healing thing.
I'm trying to riff. So I had one idea for a stupid bullshit artisanal Tamagotchi, and that was so weird to say out loud. But then I just kept getting more ideas, kind of for reasons like that. There's so many different things I want to explore there. So I'm basically going to be like a one idiot game jam on it, and explore making fun of the artisanal thing by making the most indie Tamagotchi ever that's like made of driftwood and solar powered. I'm going to explore just the cute side of that stuff that I like, and I actually have some wearable devices so you physically interact with it, and it has a little LED screen on its face, and now I'm just trying to figure out how to make it not seem like a shitty Furby. And I was thinking of trying to make one that was specifically for me that fed off of the NFC chip in my hand, and aged at a like normal rate, like a Tamagotchi you would have for like 20 years. But I'm trying to think systemically, how am I going to do that? So yeah, it's a thing I'm trying to explore. And the caretaker thing I think is an interesting appeal to it. But I'm mostly just being a dick.
I would buy a shitty Furby. One final question, and then we'll go to Con. Right, so.
I should just name it.
Travelled all the way from California. We appreciate that.
Oh yeah. So I had a question as somebody who I just recently became indie by choice.
Yay!
My question is like when I have made my own stuff in the past, like I have like all these great, wonderful personal games that I enjoy playing, but when I go to make stuff, I feel uncomfortable kind of veering into that territory more often than not. I was wondering if you had any advice for like sort of overcoming that fear and maybe also the nagging feeling that I have nothing interesting to say.
I always hear that. I hear that from so many people. They're like, I don't think I should make a personal game. I don't think I have anything interesting. I don't think it's not about if you're special or not. It's the fact that you have at least one story in you that nobody else can tell. You have at least, your experience is unique to you. And it's sort of weird. Humans are sort of a strange creature in that we are all very specific and very unique, but we're all pretty much the same anyway. So in that you're the only person that can tell your story your particular way, I promise you someone out there can relate to it. And in terms of being uncomfortable, my advice to you is to get okay with being uncomfortable. Being uncomfortable is not a bad thing. It's kind of exciting, honestly, because it means you're not being complacent. It means you're challenging yourself. It means you're growing. That feeling of being uncomfortable means you're growing, and it likely means that you're onto something. So don't be afraid, or rather accept being afraid. Be cool with being human. I'm still weirded out, like even after releasing Depression Quest, I'm still weirded out by it. I can't go back and play it. I get really uncomfortable when people talk to me about it. It was super uncomfortable when it was like blowing up and I would go on blind dates on OkCupid and people would be like, I played your game. I'm like, oh no! You know everything that's wrong with me! And the first time I ever did a Q&A about it, somebody's just like, hey, so my question is, do you worry that because of all the stigma against people with depression and stuff like that, that now you've hurt your job prospects in the future? And I'm like, oh, I didn't think about that. I'll get back to you. But the thing is, if you're taking the risk, that is so worth it. Someone will understand, and a weird thing that I wasn't expecting with Depression Quest, right? Like, part of the point was to reach out to other people suffering with it, and be like, someone gets it. What I wasn't thinking about and what I didn't expect is getting that back 10,000-fold. I constantly get letters from people being like, here's my experience, I've never told anybody this. And I guess if you're making a personal game too, one thing to be aware of is you end up in this weird position where you're not just doing tech support, you're doing emotional support. Somehow. And just be prepared. You don't have to be good at it. And there's no right way to do it. I guess just have a heads up and be cool with being uncomfortable. It's actually kind of nice in a weird way. It gets easier. It gets better.
Brilliant. Sorry, thanks very much.